Hello and welcome to Lab to Launch, the seminar series for researchers interested in pursuing entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah Jane Murdoch, the Administrative Project Coordinator for the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at UT Dallas and the Operations Manager for the Venture Mentoring Service of North Texas. As we move through today's session, I invite you to post questions into the Q&A box for our speakers to answer. Our host is Bryan Chambers, Vice President, Accelerator and Investment Fund for the Capital Factory and the Director of the UT Dallas Seed Fund. Our guest for today's session is Dr. Ted Price. Dr. Price is the Eugene McDermott Professor and Director of the Center for Advanced Pain Studies at the University of Texas at Dallas. He is co-founder of CerSci Therapeutics, Ted's Brain Science Products, and 4E Therapeutics. And now, here's Bryan Chambers and Ted Price.
Awesome, SJ. Thanks so much. Welcome, everybody. As you know, this is the Lab to Launch series, but it's really rare that we get to discuss and explore what it's like to go from lab all the way to exit. So welcome to our first Lab to Exit session. So I'm so excited to dig into this session today. As many of you know, CerSci Therapeutics recently announced that they were being acquired by Acadia Pharma in a pretty sizable buyout. In many regards, this is one of the most hopeful outcomes that entrepreneurs look to achieve to ensure their work impacts the most amount of people possible. CerSci has been a startup closely aligned with UT Dallas for several years now, and I think one that so many of us just knew the massive potential of, especially those of us that are familiar with how impressive the members of the founding team are and the chemistry that really exists between that team as well. So we're so excited to congratulate you, Ted, on the successful milestone and the achievement, and we're super excited to dig into it, to learn more about it. But first and foremost, I want to wish you a happy birthday. Today's your birthday, so thanks for being here with us on your birthday to celebrate this as well. And would like to just kick it off to you to share a little bit about your personal background. Where did you grow up? And I've known you of late, but were you always entrepreneurial? Have you always been into the sciences?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you guys very much for having me today. I guess I have always been into science, but not always entrepreneurship. But to take a step back, I was born in Kansas City. I grew up in Dallas, actually. I'm a UTD alumni, so not only am I a professor at UTD, but I went to UTD for undergrad. And I'm also a Richardson Independent School District product. So I went to elementary school, junior high, and high school. I went to Richardson High School just down the street from UTD. So almost all of my education comes from the public school systems in Texas. And that also includes my PhD, which I did at UT Health Science Center in San Antonio. I then moved from Texas to Canada, actually. So I went from San Antonio, along with my wife, to Montreal, where I was a postdoc at McGill University, which is in Montreal. I was there for 3 years, and then I started my laboratory at the University of Arizona School of Medicine, where I was in the Department of Pharmacology, and then moved back to Dallas and to UTD in 2014. So from the time I started my PhD, which was in 1998, I should also mention that I've worked with Greg Dussor. So Greg was another founder of CerSci Therapeutics and a longtime collaborator of mine now for more than 20 years. So Greg and I were PhD students in the same lab, actually, at UT Health Science Center, San Antonio. And then we went to different places to do postdocs, but we kind of wanted to run our labs jointly. So we applied to many of the same places when we were looking to start our independent groups. And University of Arizona, I guess, was crazy enough to buy into the idea that we could run our labs jointly, and they hired us both at exactly the same time. And Greg and I have run our labs jointly now since what was it? It was 2007 when we moved to University of Arizona. So it's been more than 10 years now, and we were involved in co-founding CerSci. So I've always been into science. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a physicist. I watched Cosmos on PBS when I was really a little kid, and that is what initially got me interested in science. And I never really wanted to do anything else except be a professional athlete, which wasn't going to happen. And when I was at UTD, I was majoring in physics and did pretty well at first, and then towards the end of my junior year, start of my senior year, I wasn't doing so well in my physics classes anymore. I went to an advisor who said, "Hey, you know, why don't you try neuroscience?" And I took a neuroscience class and totally fell in love with it, and that's how I got into neuroscience. And you know, when Greg and I were at University of Arizona, we working in the pain field, which I've done for most of my professional life now. You know, there's an obvious connection between the basic work that we do and the need to develop better pain therapeutics. And when we were at University of Arizona, we kind of had this idea that we'd work with big pharma companies and they'd take on our ideas and they would grow them into things that made it to the clinic. And it became clear to us that that wasn't really the way that things happened, and that we needed to be entrepreneurial if we wanted our ideas to turn into pain medicines. And we tried to do that in University of Arizona, but frankly, there just wasn't very much support. There's not a lot of investment in Tucson, Arizona. It's a beautiful city, but not a lot of investment happening, not a lot of investment banking, and there just wasn't a lot of support for that. And so when we came to Dallas, it was, well, I wanted to come back to Dallas because of my long-term affiliation with UTD and my love of this city and wanting to raise a family in this city. But another huge draw was the ability to do this kind of entrepreneurial work. And I would say we really wanted to do it, but we didn't really know how. And that all kind of really took off when we came to Dallas.
Well, that's fantastic. And give us, at a high level, you know, from CerSci and your vision for CerSci as you were starting the company. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the overarching vision for CerSci? Maybe some of us are a bit familiar with it, but for those that aren't, what is CerSci and kind of the vision that you guys had from day one as you were thinking about starting the company?
Well, I mean, frankly, it changed a fair amount over time. It wasn't actually called CerSci at first, but the single most important thing that happened along the way was meeting Lucas Rodriguez, who was the CEO of CerSci. So Lucas was a PhD student in bioengineering and also taking the entrepreneurship program in the Jindal School at the time that we met him. And really, you know, we had a meeting. I can go into the details of this later, but we met Lucas, and the whole thing at first was an effort to commercialize a number of different things that we were working on in the lab, and Lucas and Greg and I and other people that came to be part of CerSci kind of worked together on how to do that. But at first, you know, I think it was kind of a broad set of ideas of things that we were going to try to commercialize. And as we moved ahead, it became very clear that that was unfocused, and that we really needed to focus on what CerSci's mission was going to be. And that mission eventually became developing non-opioid acute pain medicines. And this is something that hasn't happened in the pain field for a long time. And, you know, the backdrop of our focus was kind of the opioid epidemic and how that was really kind of taking off. It wasn't actually taking off, you know, it'd been around for a long time, but kind of the public recognition of it and the funding opportunities that came along with that to develop the kind of drugs like we hope that we've developed really started to come into focus about the time that this was happening. And it became clear that that was a really great opportunity for us, and that we needed to split some things off and maybe create some different entities so that, you know, the opportunity for CerSci wasn't diluted by other efforts. And I think that was a great decision. That was really Lucas's decision to do that, and it worked out for us very nicely. But if we wouldn't have met Lucas, Lord knows where we would have gone with all this, honestly.
You know, Lucas being absolutely one of those people. I was so fortunate enough to meet Lucas when I first moved into the VDC. Before we had built the Blackstone Launchpad, we were being incubated in the VDC, and so I was always constantly colliding with Lucas in the hallways. And just one of those gentlemen, you know, like destined for success. Very impressive. And so I can't say that I'm totally surprised as I got to know the team to see this outcome really come to fruition. You guys have done a fabulous job, just being relentless about the mission and the progress behind CerSci. Ted, CerSci was a little bit unique because, like many entrepreneurs, and perhaps the one we most recently interviewed, Dr. Walter Voigt, who commercialized a lot of the research and IP at the university, CerSci actually acquired a set of intellectual property.
That's right.
So talk to us about that process and kind of the value of going, identifying that IP and acquiring that. And with that regard, what role did your lab play in the commercialization of this?
Yeah, so when CerSci started, we had 2 lines of research that we were focusing on. We had a long-standing interest in activators of a pathway called AMP kinase that we had worked on, Greg and I together. We did have some intellectual property around this that was tied to the University of Arizona. That IP was eventually kind of botched by University of Arizona, so nothing ever came of it. But that ended up not being what we really developed in CerSci. So as we started to kind of grow the team within CerSci, once we had decided what we were going to focus on, we brought in our chief, who eventually became our chief scientific officer, Scott Dax. And Scott was a friend of mine who both Greg and I got to know because he was at Johnson & Johnson when Greg and I's PhD mentor left UT Health Science Center San Antonio to go to Johnson & Johnson. So Chris Flores, who was Greg and I's PhD mentor, left to go to J&J to head up the biology division of analgesic development there, and Scott was leading the chemistry portion. So we met Scott in like 2002, 2003 or something like that. And Scott and I just hit it off, and we stayed in touch when I was a postdoc. When we started our labs in Arizona, we stayed in touch. We started collaborating on some things. He had left J&J. He was at another company called Gallion, and Gallion was developing some molecules, and I was advising, basically. And Gallion didn't like these assets, which is kind of funny to think about now. Not many people knew about them except Scott and I, frankly. And, Scott was no longer really encumbered with Gallion because Gallion wasn't doing very well. And we had an opportunity to acquire these assets, which I thought were fantastic assets because I'd been consulting for them. And another one of our founding group, David Hitt, was in the position to be able to acquire those assets. So we purchased them from Gallion, and we brought them into CerSci. Now we really needed to have a full blast biology pain lab to be able to do the final vetting that we thought that we really needed to do before we made that decision. So we were able to do that in our laboratory, and without that, I don't know that we would have necessarily pulled the trigger on acquiring the assets because they hadn't been vetted independently of the folks at Gallion. So that was a great position to be in, but it was just a great kind of set of circumstances that came together. And then ultimately what occurred was that we kept working on these 2 things in parallel. So we had the AMP kinase activator program. Scott had actually made some great molecules. We got a grant from NIH, to an SBR grant, to help us to develop this program. And Lucas and Scott decided they wanted to go for a direct to phase 2 SBIR to really grow the program that we had acquired from Gallion. And we got that grant. We actually got I think it was a perfect score on that grant. That became such a important thing for us to focus on that the AMPK program basically just went away at that point. And we put all of our effort into developing the molecules that ultimately were acquired by Acadia.
That's fantastic. So we call them D2P2s, direct to phase 2, right? And they're very meaningful opportunities to get to leapfrog a phase 1. You save time, you get more resources. So exactly how much, if you can quantify this, like how much research dollars actually were awarded that went into the process, your lab went into CerSci, that gave you the advantage to move this process forward. Can you share with us?
Yeah, so it's hard to know exactly how much, because there was investment that happened in Galleon that we don't know exactly how much they put into their program before we acquired it. But you know, our direct to phase 2 that we received, I think totaled about 2 million investment from NIH. That took us basically from where we stood in that program when we acquired the compound all the way through the investigational new drug application process. And then we had to raise money then to do phase 1. So Lucas did a Series A and raised the money. We also got a couple of grants. Greg and CerSci got a grant to do some work on migraine for the compound we developed. We had the AMP-K grant also, but that was a phase 1. So it was probably about 3 million in NIH grants total that we received at CerSci. There may have been some additional supplements that came after that to the grants that we had, but the ballpark, that was about it. And then the Series A, you'd have to ask Lucas for what those exact numbers were, but it was more than we raised from NIH.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that Series A in 1 second, but I want to take one step back and help the audience really know and understand. So you talk about what it means to build and go on this mission of non-opioid drugs.
Mm-hmm.
We largely know there's an epidemic that exists, but many of us might not actually know exactly what that means. So tell us really how big or how bad the problem really is that you're out there tackling. You know, what would you like the audience to know about, you know, the opioid epidemic that we're living in?
Yeah, so I mean, it is really a massive problem, and it's a two-pronged problem. So, one is the opioid addiction issue. Okay, so there are millions of people in the United States that are addicted to opioids. Sadly, there are more than 100 people, I think, still that are dying of opioid overdose every day, which is a tragedy. Not all of these people are exposed to opioids because they first take them for pain treatment, but a kind of surprisingly large number of people do. And our view in CerSci was that one of the major problems with this epidemic is that not only are opioids addictive, but they're used to treat acute pain, mostly acute post-surgical pain, or if you've had some kind of trauma. And that is exposing people to these drugs when we probably could develop a non-opioid medicine that could be used to treat a lot of these people so that they would never be exposed to an opioid to begin with. So that was really our mission, was to develop, well, I shouldn't say was, it has always been the mission, was to transform this field by developing a acute pain medicine that could be used to treat moderate to severe acute pain. So, you know, after somebody's had a surgery, or if they've had some kind of traumatic injury, and avoid having them be exposed to an opioid in the first place. So, you know, part of the goal there is to provide adequate pain relief and prevent it's hundreds of millions of people a year that are exposed to opioids from ever being exposed in the first place. So it's hard to predict who, when they take an opioid, will eventually become addicted to the opioid. But if you just take that out of the equation altogether, our view was it would have a huge positive impact on society. So that was always the goal. We came up with indications. I shouldn't say came up. We found, as we were doing more of the underlying biology, that we could potentially use these molecules to treat other forms of pain, like migraine, also certain types of neuropathic pain, probably diabetic neuropathy. There's even some suggestion that they could be used to treat ALS, which has nothing to do with pain at all. So all of those things might well be pursued by Acadia now, but I think Acadia's mission is also the same as ours, is that they would like to be the ones now responsible, since we've handed it over to them, for developing the first new non-opioid pain medicine to come onto the market for acute pain in a really, really long time. And again, you know, I think it'll have a transformative impact on medicine if it's successful.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Ted, raising on the order of $3 million in non-dilutive grant funding to help realize this mission and vision is an incredibly difficult thing to do. But I might even argue that going on and raising the private capital, the private investment, is even a harder thing to do. So talk to us about about that process, about how what went into to successfully raising your first round of private capital, and what other hacks and resources did the team or did UTD offer you that you could lean on to help navigate your first private round?
Yeah, that was really tough. And you know, it was tougher for Lucas than it was anybody else because he was at 100% of these meetings. I went to a number of them. You know, Dallas is a great place to raise money, I think, but it's not a place where people usually think of raising money in the pharma sector. And frankly, the first good bit of meetings that we had with VCs, angels, etc., was just telling people about why we're doing what we're doing and why it's important and why they should invest in this in some place besides San Francisco, San Diego, or Boston, or Philadelphia. And so, you know, there was a ton of just early education that we did, and Lucas did most of these, but you know, I did go to a fair number. Greg went to some too, and that was just really, really time consuming at first. But you know, it was also great because we met a lot of great people, and along the way, we did start to pick up groups that were interested. So ultimately, I think two things happened that kind of broke everything open for us. One was that Brent Duncan, who was involved in UTD in the Venture Development Center, and was a partner and advisor and early, I don't know that Brent was necessarily a co-founder, but he was definitely part of the early group that were very, very involved in the company. And he also acted as a mentor in terms of business development, both for myself and for Lucas. He committed to be one of the early investors. So, you know, people talk a lot about how you need to kind of get that first person who wants to put in money, and then people will follow. And that was definitely true. We also heard from people that, you know, from potential investors that they were interested in investing, but they wanted to know who the lead investor was going to be. And so without Brent being that lead person, you know, making that first commitment, I think it would have been tough. And he really helped us tremendously in many, many different ways. And then it was getting that direct to phase 2 grant. So that was really validation, independent validation that the approach that we were taking had been vetted and had a public investment in it, behind it. I think that there's an expectation in biotechs that well, maybe not in San Diego or San Francisco or Boston, but in other places, that you need to have that kind of public backing. And it was really those two things that I think, I don't want to say open the floodgates, because the floodgates never really opened, but you know, it helped bring the other groups in. And then we had some really dedicated investors, and they really helped us a lot. They made connections for us, and we put together a really fantastic team as we grew from a preclinical company who was small and, you know, was people that have a lot of expertise in that area, to a clinical stage company, you know, that got our drug through phase 1 and then ultimately saw us to the exit.
Thanks for that background, Ted. And very much appreciate Brent's support and the role that he and others played in that. Very few people get to do it alone, and must kind of often rely on advisors and mentors and investors to help along the way. But as you reflect back, so you mentioned the D2P2, you met your director phase 2, you mentioned your first private round of funding. But as you reflect back over the company's story, just to date, because it's still going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
But if you reflect back over the story that helped kind of led you to this major milestone of this acquisition, maybe what are some of the biggest factors that led to success that aren't so obvious as you look in, from the outside?
I think really learning what it means, like what it means to focus within a business, was really important. I certainly don't think I understood that at first. I mean, I really looked at it as being like an arm of running my own lab at first, and I know that created a lot of tension actually within the company, so talking from the perspective of how to help faculty at UTD or at other institutions to understand about how to see their technologies spin out. I mean, I really think you have to look at a company as having very little, if any, connection to your actual laboratory. It's a completely different thing. You don't want to try to fund your laboratory by doing stuff within a spin out. That's not the way that you should do it. And it was hard for me to figure that out. It took some time. Probably took more than a year, actually. So I know that now, and it wouldn't make the same mistake again. So I think that's one thing. I guess another thing is you really have to know like exactly where you are and how to build a team for where you are. And I think a lot of times people think about building a team at the start that can take something all the way through, but that probably is not how it's going to actually go, because you don't know what's going to happen along the way. And as I look back at CerSci, a lot of the people that played a huge role in getting us to our final goal had nothing to do with the company when we first started. We always, I think, one of the real strengths of the whole group together was that we all knew what our area of expertise was. And we were very well aware that we would have to bring in new people as we progressed to fit the gaps in our expertise. And we went a long way. We went from a compound that we just had a little bit of animal data on to something that is now probably going to go into a phase 2 clinical trial. And I think that collectively we did a really great job of finding all the people that had to do that. That we're able to bring in the expertise to get us through where we needed to go. And that was really key to us being able to do this. And especially in the amount of time in which we accomplished it. It really went, I mean, it wasn't light speed, but it went fast.
I remember something very specific, very particular you said to me in a past meeting or two that we had. And it was that it was about Lucas in particular. And you said, Lucas was always the most prepared person in the room, which was a really interesting comment. I'll never forget when you said that to me, because you went into some pretty amazing rooms with some big investors, some highly educated folks in the pharma world. What did you mean? Can you expand on that a little bit? What do you mean when you say Lucas was always the most prepared person in the room, and what really went into that process?
I mean, he's a very quick learner, for one thing, but he really did his homework on every aspect of what we were going to do, and he wasn't necessarily an expert in a lot of the things that we would do along the way in the company. But he actively sought out people that could give him really good advice. And I don't want to say like that he's super critical of himself, because I don't know if he is, but he always kind of came into things like he had a chip on his shoulder, and not like with an attitude, but just like he never had the approach that we were entitled to anything. He always went into things like he was going to earn what he hoped we would have coming to us. And I found that to be an extremely refreshing approach. I think it sometimes doesn't happen within the pharma sector, where a lot of times, it's old old maybe is not the right word, but people that have been execs in other pharma companies, they just assume a number of things, and he never took anything for granted, and I feel like that served us remarkably well.
You had mentioned the fundraise was such a hard, difficult part for your team, for Lucas, to get through. Looking back over the process, is there any advice that you would give to yourself, your team, as you were starting this? If you could reflect back to you and Lucas several years ago before you had got out and raised your first private round of funding, what advice would you give yourself, out of curiosity?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think as trained scientists, which all of us were within the company, not all from the same disciplines, right? But something that kind of everybody has to get used to in science is rejection. You get rejected all the time. Your papers get rejected. You get negative feedback on grants. You get all kinds of stuff happens to you in science from a kind of a negative standpoint, and you need to let it roll off your back and kind of bounce back quickly. And I wouldn't say that we necessarily got nasty feedback, but we got there were a lot of no's, and we never really let it get to us. And I think that was also really good, that we came from this background where we're kind of used to rejection, and we did take no for an answer, I guess, but we kept going and didn't let us demoralize us, because we knew we had a great set of data behind us. We knew that we had thoroughly vetted the mechanism and the data that we had, and we felt confident about what we were telling people, and it was just a matter of time before we would find the right person. We also knew that there was a lot of education that we would have to do, and we needed to be patient with it. So I guess that background helped us to keep a positive attitude when we were getting lots of no's.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and very common as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Ted, bring us to today. This buyout has occurred. It's been announced. What can you share with us about it? And do you look at this as the end, the middle, or the beginning, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, it is actually kind of the beginning. So the deal, the information about the deal is publicly available. So anybody that wants to can find it. There was an upfront payment, and then there's a whole lot of money on the back end. And we all poured a lot of our work into this, and a lot of our lives into it. And I want to see it get to the clinic. So I won't play an active role in that as far as I know, but I definitely don't look at what's already happened as being the end. I mean, I believe that this molecule can turn out to be a effective acute pain medicine. I think it can also be effective for other things, and I think Acadia is going to pursue that. But I want to see us get through phase 3 and have a new drug approved. So from that perspective, it's the beginning. There are some members of the team that will stay connected with Acadia and hopefully can get that going, or to help see it through. It's also very positive, I think, from the perspective of Acadia, that they've hired a number of people that are very, very well known for drug development in the pain arena, so that they in addition to bringing in our asset, brought in a new team, an executive team, who I presume is their job now to lead this, because it doesn't make sense for that to happen for any other reason, right? So that really raises my confidence level, and so yeah, it's exciting, but it is the beginning.
So you'll be taking a little bit of a less active role going forward. So with that in mind, what's next for you? How are you? Are you going to be working on some additional new entrepreneurial initiatives, or what's next?
Yes, so we have other companies. It's funny, when I was talking, when Lucas called me and told me about this, we were all really excited. He called Greg and I at the same time, so the three of us that were on the phone. And I asked Lucas what he was going to do, and he says, "Well, I'm going to run it back." And So for anybody that doesn't know what that means, it means he wants to do it again, and that's exactly what I want to do too. So I don't know that we will have the same team assembled to do it again, but I do think that all of us that were involved in this have learned an awful lot about the process, and I think all of us are going to be trying to do this again. So I have another 2 ventures that we've started relatively recently that are working in the pain space. One of them is more of a biomarker and bioinformatics company, that's Dolomics. That's going to be led by Candler Page, who's a PhD student of mine, who will be the CEO of that company, and we're going to be competing in the UTD Big Idea competition coming up, and we're also a finalist for another business competition that's run by a very, very, very large biotech company in California. So I'm pretty excited about the opportunities in that company. And then we have 4E Therapeutics. We got an $8 million grant from NIH to develop some molecules specifically for neuropathic pain and 4E Therapeutics. And we have a great group of molecules, and we're about to start raising money, I think, there. And we have a great CEO in Craig Benson. And so most of that company is actually in Austin, but we've licensed the UTD technology, and I'm super excited about what we can do in 4E Therapeutics.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know, as you said something earlier, and I wanted to dig in just a little bit deeper on it, and then maybe SJ can help us field some questions if there are any in the queue. You said something that Dallas wasn't and maybe isn't the place to raise biotech and kind of pharma funding. Do you see that changing? A lot of people are working to try to change that. Do you see that actively changing, in your opinion?
Yeah, I do. I think there have now been a number of successes here. We're one example. There have been some more out of UT Southwestern. There's also been some out of the University of North Texas Medical School in Fort Worth. So I do think that the ecosphere here is changing a little bit in that regard, but maybe there's also some joining with some of the growth that's happened in Houston and in Austin. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we may maybe have a little bit of a triangle going on there of biotech investment. It seems like maybe there's a little bit more in Austin than there is in Dallas right now, but I think that the opportunities are growing, and I'm super excited about it because it's fun. First of all, that there's a growing number of groups that are getting into this here, and I guess from the kind of broader perspective, the thing that I think is exciting in general is that for us to really have the kind of impact that we want to have on patients, improving the life of patients, I think that more and more professors at research institutions are realizing that they need to be the ones that spin these things out and then work with people in the business community, or have students that go into, you know, scientific and business community to do it, because the innovation at the basic research level really doesn't happen within a lot of the big pharma or giant biotech companies anymore. They innovate by acquiring innovation. And I think now that the secret's out about this, and as more people like me have had experiences, more people like Lucas, you know, who have an academic scientific background, have had successes as being CEOs of these companies, that will continue to proliferate. And my view is that will be for the great benefit of human health.
Oh, that's awesome. SJ, how are we doing on questions? Do we have anything in the queue?
Yeah, we have several questions. The first couple of questions are more specific to the drug itself, so I'm going to group those together right now. They just wanted to know a little bit more about the therapeutic. Are there any side effects to your drug? What is the advantage over other similar drugs on the market? And also, do the therapeutics also enable treatment of types of pain that are currently untreated because of the risk of opioids?
Yeah, so what I can say is that the drug that was developed is a reactive oxygen reactive nitrogen decomposition catalyst, and it may have an action on other reactive molecules that are produced endogenously We know that those molecules are created when you have an injury, like an incision and separation of muscle when you have a minor surgery, and that they're involved in causing pain because they interact with ion channels that are expressed by your pain sensing neurons called nociceptors. And basically, the breakthrough that Scott Dax, our medicinal chemist and chief scientific officer, deserves credit. Well, he deserves credit for lots of things, but he particularly deserves credit for this, is that molecules that can kind of do this exist, but they have toxicities because they have a metal catalytic core. And what Scott figured out how to do, and I'll let Scott potentially someday explain how he was able to do this, but he figured out how to do it without the metal catalytic core. And it also seems to increase the ability of the molecules to catalytically remove these reactive molecules. And that dramatically reduces the toxicities. So basically, what Scott did was to take an idea that was already out there in the field. So we did not invent this idea. We're not the ones that showed reactive oxygen, reactive nitrogen could do this. But we showed that these new kinds of molecules were remarkably effective, and that their toxicity was dramatically, and I really mean dramatically, reduced. So we are, I think, potentially more confident in anything that they're safe molecules than anything else. That they do appear from all of the studies that we've done to be incredibly safe, and I think that gives us a lot of hope for them potentially being used to treat acute pain in lots of different settings, because they could potentially be given with lots of other, co-treatments that people might be getting when they're having a surgery because they're so safe.
Great. If Bryan doesn't mind, I'll continue with audience questions. So how has the experience of creating a company altered the conduct of your future academic research?
Well, I guess I kind of think of everything through this lens now. So, I guess I used to have this idea, as I mentioned to Bryan earlier, that, we would do research and then pharma companies would pick up on that, and they would develop these drugs. And I now know, or they would invent drugs, that could target these mechanisms. And I now know that in most cases really is not how it works. And you need innovation happening within small biotechs to create the innovation that the pharma companies will then acquire. So I look at this as a huge opportunity for us. I look at it as a huge opportunity for the students that are working in my lab. And, I would love to see more of our students go from doing a PhD to being the CEO of a company that is developing a idea that they, worked on when they were a graduate student or a postdoc. And, to prove that I'm serious about that, look at Candler Page, right? She was or she still is one of my PhD students. She's about to finish. She's going to be the CEO of Doloromics. I think we've already incorporated, and I'm pretty confident she's going to walk out of my lab into this job as CEO with some money raised and a nice runway ahead of her.
Ted, I want to talk about that for 1 second. Something that's always on my mind as I've started businesses, some have been successful, some have failed. I watch other people's do this. I think team and team chemistry is so important. It's also so hard to actually achieve. There are 4 things that come to my mind I've actually that I say are kind of requirements for a team to succeed. And they all happen to start with C. But that's the character of the individuals. It's the competency of the individuals to bring something very specific to the table. It's the communication from within the team, and it's the commitment to the outcome and to kind of go the distance, because it gets really hard. What's missing from that? As you reflect back on CerSci, do you agree with that? Is there anything missing from that you think goes into team chemistry? Just out of curiosity.
No, I mean, honestly, not really. I mean, that was we didn't put it into those same terms, but I think that was very much our philosophy as well. I mean, it's not that we didn't have some conflicts along the way. I mean, there always are, but I do believe that we were all were all competent in the things that we were tasked to do. We understood where we were not competent. I mean, that was a really important thing, that nobody BS'd about what they could do when they knew that they couldn't do it, right? And I think that is something that can be an absolute breaker for a team, is, you know, not having the right people to do the difficult tasks that will come along the way. So we always brought in expertise when we needed to, which helped us tremendously. And we were all very committed to our goal, and we stuck with it. Even if we had conflicts, we all knew we were committed to that goal, always. And we still are. And, you know, I think in the other ventures that we've made, that we all feel the same way about that. You know, it's not that hard in the pain area to be very committed to it too, because, you know, it's so obvious if you spend any time talking to people that work in the clinical world, which all the people I'm associated with have done, that this is such a huge problem. And, you know, the other thing about pain is that almost everybody knows somebody that suffered from this, you know, and you know, well, like they're in their family, or it's a very close friend. Sometimes it's one of the people on the team. So, you know, that I think has a huge impact, because most people that have severe pain know that none of the stuff out there right now helps them.
Yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about maybe perhaps one of those moments or one of the conflicts. I think you might have alluded to it a little bit earlier, or to one, you know, about the way you might have been running your lab. But you know, one of the smartest gentlemen that I have the opportunity to work with told me once, and it really resonated with me, that your ability to succeed is directly correlated to the founder's ability to successfully disagree, right? And that's because conflicts come up a lot, and not everybody always agrees as you are building a company. Do you agree with that? And if you don't mind, could you share maybe one of those moments that might have been a little bit more controversial or intense, where there just wasn't such a clear path forward? Anything come to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I first of all, I do agree with that. You have to be able to resolve conflicts, because conflicts will come up in anything. Conflicts are going to come up. I mean, they're just going to happen. It's human nature. So if there are people in a team that are not able to deal with conflict, I mean, there's certain types of conflicts that people should not tolerate. Okay, that's obvious. Mm-hmm. But, you know, just in trying to make a decision about how to move a company forward, you're going to have conflicts. And, you know, I think we all knew that we could work with each other. I don't think anybody ever really seriously doubted that. I don't feel comfortable telling about any conflicts except ones that directly involve me, where I was at fault. So I'll just, you know, the thing with me was that I had a lot of trouble understanding this idea that this company should not play a role in funding my lab. And it just was hard for me to get over that. And I should have looked at it differently from the start, but I didn't. And it took me a while to learn. And it created some conflicts. And, you know, it was really finally Lucas that said, hey, Ted, you know, this is really not how this can work. And it's going to continue to create a problem until you can let this go. And I really just needed somebody to tell me to let it go. And I'd like to think that I let it go. You can ask him if I actually did. But, you know, and I just had to change my frame of mind about thinking about the whole thing. But, you know, funding and, you know, having to fund a company and fund your own lab, you know, it's stressful. So I can defend myself a little bit, but I was at fault.
Yeah, well, I'd like to hope, and my wish is that the next time you do this, it's obviously underway now, and maybe hopefully many times over. You know, taking something from start to exit is such an incredible journey, such a difficult journey. But those that are able to do it, there's history that they, as Lucas said, run it back, continue to do it and replicate it. And hopefully raising money isn't as hard once you've achieved this. Obviously, you guys in your lab might have some other resources of your own to contribute, to help along the way. And so I'm super optimistic for the lab, the things that you're going to continue to get involved with, because it's going to compound as you turn around and reinvest back into these processes. It's something I think we've said a lot about the Dallas community, or the community in North Texas, and largely in Texas, is that once somebody achieves that exit, they begin to kind of reinvest into the process, reinvest into the community, more startups, and it begins to change. It is one of the best economic drivers for our region, is those people that continue then to do it again and do it again, and bring even more people along for that ride to experience. So I'm hopeful that will all be very true for you, and I'm very excited to see what's next, to see you eat in the Big Idea competition, and to only learn how the Venture Development Center, the Office of Research, Office of Technology Commercialization can continue to support you and help you along the way. SJ, are there any more questions, or should we go ahead and hop over to the booster session?
We do have more questions, however, we should probably hop over. So I'm actually going to be copy and paste all of those questions and take note of them. So hopefully all of you who have submitted questions will be able to participate in the booster. I will repaste. I did paste the link into the chat. I will repaste it for convenience. But yeah, I think that will probably wrap up at this point, if that's okay with you, Bryan.
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right with me. Ted, again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
for sharing your story. Very, very rare. We'll get to probably do a lab to exit founder story. So we really appreciate you sharing, and we'll see you in the booster session.
Great.
Great. Thank you both. And thanks everyone for attending today. Oh, yes. Thank you, Ted. Thanks for attending today. We hope you can join us in 2 weeks for our next Lab to Launch session, which will be featuring Dr. Eric Olson. And again, the link is in the chat.